Hello and welcome to Movers and Makers Virtual Chat Series episode number 9, brought to you by Low Key Arts and made possible with the generous support of the Gail Pratt Fraser Trust, to whom we extend our gratitude. I'm your host, Sonny Kay, Executive Director of Low Key Arts. My guest this afternoon is someone whose influence on underground music and the evolution of punk politics has been both iconic and profound. Her presence and vision are now measured on a global scale. And having devoted her time in recent years to such noteworthy companies as eMusic and Kickstarter. Molly Neuman is the president of Songtrust, the world's largest digital royalty management service, as well as a founding member of the iconic and legendary Riot Girl band Bratmobile, and others. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Molly Neuman to the show. I'm so thrilled to have you here, Molly. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonny. And should add longtime good friend of yours. And
well, thank you. Yes.
I was thinking, were we ever tour mates? I don't know if we ever actually played multiple shows together, but we've played in a row, but we've played multiple shows together.
Absolutely, yeah.
In life.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yes. Yeah.
Which is, a great, it's really important for me personally to remember that. And also it's kind of funny now that I have a kid who can start to understand live music and it's like, what? That was you? What?
Well, I'm hoping that we can talk about your musical past a little bit today. I'd love to talk about Molly, the musician, as well as Molly, the executive and shaper in the world of music now. But we have a deep shared history, as you just mentioned, and certainly a lot of other things in common. But I think your story, from the get-go, is a great example of someone sort of moving up the ranks of the music world, so to speak.
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Well, let's jump into it. You are a native of Washington, D.C., is that right?
That's right. That's where I was born, and I lived mostly in town, but also for a while we lived in Maryland, closer to Annapolis. But okay. I was born in Washington, and then from about 10 through the end of high school, we lived in town. And then moved to the West Coast for college and stayed there for quite a while.
Right. Now, before you did that, I was curious. Were you involved in the music scene in DC as a teenager?
Not as a teenager. So the funny truth is, when I'm really insular and protective. So I knew about DC music, and you would get the city paper as the main local weekly, and you would see all the shows at DC Space at 9:30, and I would they would register with me, and in 9th grade I had a tape with a Right This Spring song on it, and so I was I knew For Want Of was the song, and so I knew about Right This Spring as a thing. Mm-hmm. I knew about punk from suburbia mostly. Oh, so wow. DRI and TSOL were probably the more clear references. Wow. And then and so from that, I knew about those things, but I was not bold enough. And I don't think if I had asked permission that I would have been, sure, go downtown and, go to a show at DC Space. So I didn't really, until I went to college, and my next door neighbor in the dorms was Allison Wolf, who became the singer of Bratmobile. She's from Olympia, Washington, and really sort of, played all this music from Olympia for me. And, we started going to shows all the time in Eugene, and we would go to Portland, we'd go to Olympia. And then by the end of our freshman year, Fugazi was on their tour, so that was 90. And so I met Fugazi in Portland, and
that would have been their first national tour?
toward maybe 89 or 88 as well. They have the archive, so you can you can see. Yep. I could see all of these very important shows. So after I met them there, I met Ian, and when I got home for the summer, I started going to shows by myself. And through my friends in Olympia, kind of found out about weird things. And I started just kind of sort of meeting people. Mm-hmm. And by then by the next summer is when we started Bratmobile. So we were full on DC punks by 91.
All right.
But it took me a while.
Let me ask you a question. You went to Evergreen. Bands trace their roots back to there. What's the appeal of Evergreen? Why was that such a epicenter of activity?
Well, yeah, I mean it's a really wild little microcosm of the universe. I started at the University of Oregon, and I went there for 2 years in Allison, and I sort of became best friends. And she was from Olympia, so when we started going there for to sort of stay with her family and go to shows up there. There was a sort of unique music scene. And then I started school taking any class that I wanted. So I wasn't really on a track to graduate probably ever, based on, I was just I want to take this sociology class. That's grad level. I want to take this intro to women's studies. Nothing really added up to a degree. And Evergreen is perfect for that because there's no grades.
Yeah, don't they allow you to sort of write your own degree? Is that?
Yeah, so you get a BA or BS, and there may be more rigor now around some of those things, but at that point, it was pretty flexible. And so I had a lot of credits already when I started college, and so when I got to Evergreen, I think I needed another 3 quarters. It was just so I finished early, and I think it was that there was access to tons of production equipment. They had an incredible media library. So if you wanted equipment to make your own things, you could check that out. Mm-hmm. They have a wonderful facility for recording music and for film. And I was studying filmmaking at that time. And so it was very much like a creator type of, you just had access to tools. And that, along with a pretty sort of progressive / left-wing political philosophy, and a lot of faculty who were trained in that, I think it was very much really attractive for those kinds of thinkers. And it's out of town in the woods by the beach. It's just its own universe. And yeah, I think, but the radio station also, like a lot of places, bred, that sort of sharing of information about music, and, people who were obsessed about it would kind of join there. So I think that's where K Records and Sub Pop really where they found their origins.
Right. Okay.
I missed the broadcast with the Locusts too, so I hope I live up to the standard.
Well, they ambushed me at the end with some scandalous information and revelations that I am still in the process of living down. So.
Oh goodness! Okay, all right, I won't do that.
Is it safe to say that around the time you moved to Olympia, you started to become a little bit more politically aware and a little bit more politicized in your activities? I suppose, and I guess what I'm leaning to is the inception of the zines you started doing.
Right.
The first one, which famously I think was Riot Girl. Is that right?
Well, we started Girl Germs first.
Oh, okay.
And then Riot Girl kind of followed it. It was a little bit more of a sort of, like a pamphlet, quick, right. Okay. Quick production. So coming from DC, I had grown up in, I guess you would characterize them as mainstream politics, mostly the Democratic Party. Now probably, in the lens of our current times, who knows how you would characterize it, but yeah. but I was aware of political thought in a pretty mainstream two-party way actively. Yeah. And then the late 80s with, apartheid still being, a thing in South Africa, and more consciousness coming around like social justice and abortion rights being a pretty mainstream conversation also. Those were things that I had a personal connection to, as well as I had worked as a volunteer one summer before, I can't think, it was before my senior year, maybe my junior year in high school, at an organization called the Children's Defense Fund. And they had a big campaign towards like adolescent pregnancy prevention. So like I was familiar with slogans and imagery and the connection to sort of political discourse. And then the Gulf War happened.
Right.
And so like a lot of those things blended my political consciousness. But I would say that, getting into school, I started studying ethnic studies and sort of Black activism primarily, and then women's studies. And a lot of those and then political economy and other sort of more Marxist schools of thought. Mm-hmm. And that was this, and then you had Ulysses, the band, happening at the same time, who was very overt in their sort of rhetoric around politics. Who knows what the true, sort of like belief system, right. But it was powerful. Yeah. And I think that, as well as, sort of the awareness of, there were not that many women playing in bands. There were not that many women, putting on shows. The lack of visibility around gender issues in music was also very much sort of the convergence of I think it was all of those things and many more that I'm not thinking of right now.
Right. So as you said, you began first of all playing with Allison Wolf. And
yeah.
Am I correct in my understanding that the band started just as a two-piece?
Yeah. Our first, so we were really into the Bands on K records that were, they put out a bunch of tapes, and they had these very sort of like sing-song, maybe one guitar, maybe two, maybe drums and guitar, or just vocal and guitar. And a few different bands. If they were super melodic and catchy, and like, definitely one of those like, oh, I could do that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So one of the first things that we would do is we would go to frat parties and start singing Beat Happening songs.
Incredible.
like the most demented dynamic now. Just imagine, because we kind of wore like thrift store clothes, and Allison had very specific glasses, right, and a style. I was a little more of like, I don't know what my style was then, kind of like J. Crew hippie.
Oh wow, okay.
Vibe. Yeah, it was really pretty weird. And I was figuring it out. And so we would go to shows that like, the frat band would finish to like, go take a break, and we would start singing these songs, and people were just so pissed.
Wow.
And, we had probably like had some of the keg too. And like, we didn't really care. So that was our first sort of behavior around that. And then we started the band as a two-piece. Our first show officially was February 14th in 1991. And it was just us with Bikini Kill, I think their second or third show, and a band called Some Velvet Sidewalk. And that was sort of like not ideal. I played the guitar or the drums, and Allison sang. And
so you would play guitar on one song and drums on the next, kind of thing.
Kind of, yeah. Like mostly, it was like I was the instrumentalist because I had been learning guitar, and we had met Erin. I had met her at a show at DC Space over Christmas break, and we had that's her in the middle. And we had planned on like being pen pals. So we traded fanzines. She did a fanzine called Teenage Gang Debs. And then we were going home for spring break. My brother was born in February of that year. And so I was like, I've got to go meet my brother. Allison, come home with me for spring break. And I probably saw my brother once because we ended up just like going to shows. We drove up to Ulysses and Beat Happening or on tour. So we went to like Bard College, and then we went to Maxwell's in New Jersey, and kind of didn't tell my dad where we were going. I took the car, and so he never really asked me, but I was like, oh, we're going to show in Baltimore. Don't worry about it. And because we drove up and back in the same night. And then Sassy magazine reviewed our fanzine, and one of the women who had been in a band that opened worked there. And she was like, she had written in the review, like, oh, I met these girls at Bard College when my band played with Ulysses. So my dad saw it. I was like very proud, like, oh, I'm in a magazine. He's like, I was wondering why there were so many miles on the car.
Amazing.
So I've never been very good at hiding my tracks, I guess.
Right. Didn't Erin subsequently work at Sassy?
She did. She worked there that summer. So it was all like part of the vibe that was going on then. Guess like Ian had been Sassy's Boy in America, and then they were reviewing fanzines and 7 inches, and so it's so weird to think, because Sassy is a fashion magazine for girls, but they had that element of awareness, and they tried their best, I think, to weave it in between what the advertisers were trying to see.
It was remarkable. I mean, I remember when I was would have been about 17, 18 at that time. Right. And my sister would have been 13 or 14. She was a subscriber to Sassy. And
You're like, what?
I would sneak into her room and steal Sassy to read about the Sassy story, which is amazing to think about now.
That's awesome.
One thing that always struck me about Olympia, not to get hung up on a side note here, but I only made it to Olympia in the mid-90s, and it was all, by that point kind of a legendary place with all these incredible bands and all the labels
Nirvana
there
and all of it.
Of course, yeah. I mean, the Nirvana thing just put it over the top. It would have been incredible just alone with Kay and Kill Rock Stars and all those bands. But I was struck by what a working class kind of normal place Olympia is. It doesn't feel like Sedona. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel like Asheville or any place that you might kind
has that sort of vibe. Yeah, I mean it's the capital, so it has the state workers, and I think state government kind of jobs that support it in town, and then it's still the Northwest, so there are these industrial pockets. It's also part of the Puget Sound, so there's all the fishing and all those sorts of things too. So it's a really it's incredible. I went back the summer of 2019, and it's like most towns. It's still there now. There's condos, there's but it is such a insanely beautiful part of the world too.
Absolutely.
That it's interesting, and I think that the Northwest seems to have a lot of that hybrid reality. Eugene certainly, it's like Springfield, which is right across the 5, is a logging town. Then Eugene has the university, but it also has like the Ken Kesey real out there zone, like not too far out of town. And I think everybody's sort of coexisting, and you still see the evidence of that now with like the land. What was, the people that invaded the BLM lands and wanted to take it back, and it's like there's extreme stuff. Well,
yeah, it's sort of been on the political front lines in one way or another always, right?
Yeah,
indigenous rights and everything else, logging and Great. Well, okay. So, pardon me here. I'm just looking at my little cheat sheet.
No worries.
So, Bratmobile really sort of hit the ground running, and within a couple of years, you were touring in Europe and releasing singles all over the place. And
if everybody started with singles, right? So,
right.
I mean, it's like that you had to have your first 7-inch to
before anything. When I got started, that's all I ever wanted to do, and I thought that
right.
7-inch would be it. Yeah. Absolutely. How was the reception to Bratmobile internationally as opposed compared to how you were received in Olympia or around the U.S.?
The Riot Girl as a concept, in about by 1992, had started to gain a lot of energy, and and I think back about some of it is the radical idea that we wanted to support other women, other girls playing music specifically was shocking. And it's painful but it was absolutely true. And it was sensational. The Sally Jesse Raphael show wanted us to go on and talk about Riot Girl, really kind of bizarre things. And, the media coverage of it, because it was specifically supporting, the visibility of women and girls playing music, was confrontational. And there was also certainly, and I think there are bands of that time. I know that like 7 Year Bitch didn't consider themselves Riot Girls, and Spit Boy certainly the same, but they had specific feminist points of view that they were sharing. And so and they were reacting to like the environment at shows that was, super macho, and a lot of, the aggression in punk that was just not safe. So trying to sort of challenge those dynamics made, I think, the association with a lot of what Riot Girl was very sort of an aggressive assessment. So Bratmobile, not very aggressive. Just like in our music and and the way that the things that Allison would sing about, she's very pointed and she's very critical. Sure. But, I think that sonically it being a little bit less, intense than some of the other music of our peers, I think it was like a double-edged sword. So I think we had a lot of people who were like, oh, thank God. Right. And we would play more like indie rock type places. We also played bars, which not every band of the time did. So we played the Chameleon in San Francisco, and I think not in Denver. I can't remember what we did, but we like in Salt Lake we played a bar. And
I don't think Bratmobile played in Colorado.
We played in Denver. Maybe we skipped it. We played it was a pretty, like our first tour where we drove cars one way across the country. We definitely played Salt Lake. I thought we played but we might've played a bar. So if you were in Boulder, you might not have.
I'd like to think that I would have been tuned in enough to get myself there, regardless of where it was. I could be wrong about that.
That was the thing about living in Eugene. There were certain bar shows that we figured out how to get into, and then there were others that were like we just watched from the street. Right. Because you could see the window. The window was like the stage was right there. Right. So there, I think in certain ways, wherever there was somewhere to like receive us, we had a different angle. And when we played in the UK in 1993, we toured with Heavenly and other bands that were certainly less, punk or intense. And I think that there were people that liked us because of that. But I also, I I don't know if I've ever really thought this through, but we were kind of like 1 year younger than Bikini Kill.
Mm-hmm.
So, or, maybe. And just like there was always a little bit of that sort of like little sister vibe, even though that wasn't overt and it wasn't hierarchical, but that was, and they were, Toby had been in many bands from a young age, and Kathleen had been in a few already. So they just had more experience.
Sure.
And, we were flying a little bit blind. And I think that sort of dynamic also was at play.
Right. Okay. And the band kind of was sort of hyperactive for a couple year period, and then I think maybe just kind of sort of burned out or got, the usual stuff. Maybe got tired of.
We finished school. Yeah. We didn't live in the same town. We tried to figure out how to keep it up, remotely. And I had moved to Oakland by that point, and we just sort of like on a different track. They were both in DC.
Right.
So yeah, in 94, I think we played our last show, and then they started Cold Hearts for a few years.
Right.
And I was doing the Peaches at that time. And then we started back, I guess like, it seemed like forever, but it was probably 3 years, like 97. We started playing again.
Yeah. But also, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, it's not something that gets as much press as your other groups, but in that little window there before you moved to the Bay Area, you had another project that was actually very prolific at the time, which was the Frumpies. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about that at all, or is that?
Sure. I like the Frumpies. Kathy and Toby are the songwriters of the Frumpies, and they are just geniuses of of wit and word, and the sort of like they're some of the catchiest songs, and we recorded them all. I think we recorded them all on a 4-track cassette. Maybe one of the singles we recorded on a reel-to-reel, but they were all very lo-fi, intentionally.
Sure.
And some, even maybe the first one, which we recorded in DC, I can't remember, but that one's like there were literal garbage cans involved with microphones, right? Like at some point in some of these recordings. So it sounds cool, but it's certainly for some people's taste and not for everybody's. I think part of what, when I think back on it, playing for Toby, who is like one of the best drummers of all time, and being her drummer was something that like I never felt at ease. I always felt like, okay, when she'd be like, okay, play this.
Right. And
it really helped me kind of accelerate a little bit in my own playing. And, but I love those songs.
And just to clarify for anyone who doesn't know, that the Frumpies was you as well as 3 members of Bikini Kill and Michelle from the Makeup.
Yes. Michelle joined us for a tour and one single, I think, maybe 1 or 2.
Oh, okay. And that band sort of kind of came together off and on over the years and just kind of put out stuff at random, if I'm not mistaken.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we kept it like, we started simultaneously. So Bikini Kill was happening, Bill was happening. And then, they had all these songs, and we started recording them bit by bit over the years. And then we toured Italy in 2000, something random like that.
Incredible.
Pardon?
I didn't know the Frumpies toured anywhere, let alone in Italy.
We toured the U.S. with Huggy Bear.
Oh wow!
Yes, we toured. These routes of those tours, like they're insane. We went, from the Bay Area, San Diego. Did we play? Yeah, we played Arizona. I don't think we played in Texas, and then like shot up and played Minot, North Dakota. Like, think about it. From San Diego to Minot, it doesn't make any sense
at all.
And then kind of like moved back around, because they're like, I don't know how this happened, but when we played in Minot, Monsulo was there, and Jason White was playing with Mansula, and Lance Hahn was playing with Mansula then.
Yeah.
And so that is like one of the best nights of my life. I didn't drink at all then. And so we ended up, like, the three of us stayed up all night, like just talking. And, you know, Jason and I were basically neighbors in Oakland, but we hadn't met yet. And I think it's just like a funniest, wildest sort of memory because it's so far north. I mean, it's on the border of Canada. Yeah. It's the most random place to play. The show was incredible. Mansula was awesome. Was there somebody an Aggie Bear?
Who lived in Minot? Who lived in Minot that was bringing everybody there? Because for a few months it was like a fixture on the touring circuit.
I'm maybe Toby. Toby is a good diarist, so she might well. I can't remember who actually booked that tour, but
I feel like there was one person there instrumental in all that, and they left. And I no knock on Minot. I've never been there. I haven't heard about bands playing there in a long time. So yeah, but I remember for a minute, it was on every itinerary.
It was the destination because the kids were so awesome. And the other places like that for us were Sioux City, Dayton, and like where people were just apeshit. Like they just were. The kids were nuts, and you understand it now. And thinking about it also in the context of pre-COVID modern times, where everybody knows about everything, and the only way you knew anything is if that one person figured out how to get something from MRR to. Yeah, I mean, like it's so carrier pigeon.
Yeah, for real.
Compared to what these kids now know, I mean. It's nuts. So but those shows were all, in between a wild show in Sioux City, which was still sparsely attended.
Sure.
Or Minot or Dayton, you did have the like no one there.
Yeah.
Places. So I think when the Peaches toured, we played in Boulder, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Did, yeah, and at my house.
Yes, we stayed at your house, and we also played in Sioux Falls, right? Everybody played there, but nobody went to that show.
What about Rapid City? Did you play there?
Rapid City, maybe one of those. Yeah.
Rapid City was incredible. It was the same thing, just few hundred kids, all of them very into punk and hardcore, and every band on their way from Seattle to Chicago would go through there.
So if those scenes had maintained, like if the universe hadn't exploded into the internet, do you think maybe we would have things wouldn't be so bleak as they are now? A little bit.
Yeah, I mean, to consider absolutely. I mean, those were special.
I mean, you're in Arkansas now, so you also have a different perspective of the way that culture and what you're doing in your work, right? Like how culture informs communities and
no doubt
how critical it is, and then how fragmented everything is. It's very easy to ignore as well as participate. It's extreme.
Absolutely. Yeah. And and what's required now to engage is a much smaller, much quicker investment of time and emotions and money.
Right.
Well, before we get to talking about what you've spent the last decade accomplishing, just finish your musical trajectory here, because we haven't yet touched on my personal favorite of your projects, because not that I don't love everybody involved with Bratmobile, but the Peaches are very close to my heart for many reasons, and we all played many shows together back then.
Yeah.
And I think this conversation wouldn't be complete if we didn't at least mention the Peaches. And Peaches were active, I think, from about 94 till roughly 90, probably right around the time you got Bratmobile going again.
Exactly. It was about those 4 years.
Okay.
And that was us, two San Diegans, and then Chris and me and little children. I think Carlos in that picture, he must have been still 17 there, right? Like he was.
I never realized how young. He always seemed much more mature for than that, I guess, at least to me.
No, he has had he and I are still very close, and he has always been wise beyond his years. Yeah.
And in fact, you guys had a project together, which I wasn't even aware of until I started doing my research for this discussion today. But you guys played together in New York in the mid 2000s.
Yeah, so when I moved here in 2004, and about a year or so later, so another where we like really jumped to some of our mutual bizarre friends in common. So in about 2005, I started going to Spain all the time.
Right.
And so your friend and mine, Lolo Donada, who's an artist and was in a band called Grab a Tape. He and I became really good friends, and I was like, I'm ready to play music again. It sort of had gone through a big change, moving to New York, and I was actually at a festival, the festival where I met Lolo. Our friends Lazaus were playing, and Ted Leo was playing. So I had been there I went there with Ted, but I had known Arnau because of playing with VSS, I think, right? Omega Cinco.
Omega Cinco came along a few years later. The VSS would have been, the VSS was over in 1997, and that Omega Cinco record came out, I believe, in 2002.
Okay. I don't know who, so they stayed at my house. Like Alicia brought them to my house, and must have been 2002.
Yeah, right? Alicia from 310 from San Diego.
Yes, yes. And so I met Arnau there, but I think Brabmobile had played in Barcelona, and we had sort of like a little bit of overlap here or there. So anyway, cut to 2005. I was at this show in San Feliu Festival, meeting all of these people again and hanging out with Arnau and those guys. And I was like, I'm ready to play. So I think I texted or emailed or whatever my device capacity was at that point. And Carlos, and I was like, I want to play. And he had been talking. So this is a very fun fact. He had been talking to Rick Froberg about playing. And so we actually, when I got back in like September 2005, Carlos and Rick and I played right before the Obits started. Amazing. And I think Rick was like, they're a little bit more my speed. And, Carlos is very specific in his guitar playing, as is Rick. But we had we had like a few tunes. I don't think we had lyrics or singing, but it's like really good.
Is there a practice tape of this somewhere?
I don't think so. I'm bummed. I mean, I wonder if I could like get Rick to remember those riffs. I don't remember. I like, it would be really fun. But anyway, he kind of like ghosted us for a bit. And it's fine. And we're still friends. And we had become friends with some other people here in New York. And so Carlos and I kept playing, and we had another friend join us to sing, and we had a little bit of like a bass player rotation. I've never had great luck with bass players, including Rob from the Peach.
Not to knock Rob.
Not to knock Rob, who is also a New Yorker. Yeah. And we're in touch too, so which is nice.
Good. And that group, that project was called Love or Perish?
Yeah. And we recorded a record, and we recorded at this studio that Full Force owned, I think.
Oh, wow.
At least it called Jam.
What? Wow.
I think it was like, I can't remember who like engineered it, but it was affordable. Okay. And I had been putting out records by that point. So I was putting out, I had put out the Grab a Tape record and Lazaus. And
you started a label called Simple Social
Graces.
Discos,
yeah. So I was very inspired by my Spanish life.
Focused
and I was a maniac. Sunny, I had a regular job by this point, but I did have work in Europe. Mm-hmm. And so I would book trips and like fly into Madrid, hang out for the weekend, go to wherever I had to go for my work, and then fly to Barcelona for the end weekend before I could, like, literally the people there did not know what to make of me. It wasn't like a romantic, I mean, it was romantic in the sense of like, as a lot of punk is, like, you're just obsessed with these people, their personalities, and like the music, and it's so exciting. And I was like, I literally went there about 20 times in 1 year.
Oh my God.
And then I met my current husband and forever husband, Alex. And then I started tapering down, like going there. And that was sort of that, but I'm still in close touch with most of those people too, which is nice. But that was also when I was like, okay, this point in my life, Lover Parish did actually play some West Coast shows. We played a show for it was the Fuck Yeah Fest then. And at the Echo. So we played like San Francisco and LA and San Diego. And then at the end of that, I was like, I'm good. I decided to go to culinary school.
Right.
So I was doing that part-time, and like, I'm just like, I can't, New York is so intense with schedules. It was really like, it bummed me out. I couldn't handle practice schedules, and I still had a full-time job, and everybody else had, Carlos worked at night because he's a tango instructor, and Massimo, our singer, ran a restaurant then. And so it was just like, I'm good, guys. So they kept going for a while. And then I was doing cooking and work, and, ended up getting married and all of that stuff. So.
Well, you're kind of beating me to the punch a little bit on
Sorry.
The cooking thing. Let the cat out of the bag. Let's back up a little bit.
Sure.
So around the time that you moved to Oakland and joined and formed the Peaches, you also became you began playing a very crucial role with at that point the very well established Lookout Records,
right?
Which was at that point experiencing this sort of mushrooming popularity due to Green Day, and having the Green Day catalog. Not to mention Operation Ivy and a bunch of other things that were basically household names. And that kind of was where I think it's safe to say you kind of began the trajectory of sort of more admin type work, if you want to call it that, that has kind of landed you where you are now.
Totally. I mean, so my qualifications for that job, I always joked, was that I had a job before, because Pat and Chris, I think we were like in high school when they started working there. And so that was, and Trio was already, I mean, literally like it was a mess. And the room was like 5 of them in something similar to this, like, could almost touch both walls.
Right.
And it really was, a wild time, because Green Day was exploding, the catalog was selling. I had nothing to do with that, but they had been signing a lot of bands, and they were all like, what about me? I'm not going to name names, but most of them you assume were like, I'm better than Green Day. Why aren't we as popular? Right? Like, that's what they opened for me. Like, how many times do you want to hear that kind of story?
Sure.
And the White Stripes opened for Bradmobile. Okay. So, like, there's good job.
Yeah.
But it doesn't like, that doesn't have anything to do with, but there was a lot of energy around pop punk and Lookout bands and Epitaph bands, and, a lot of interest. And it was all over the place in Europe and in the US and in Japan, like all punk in the 90s. And so, I tried to kind of like, I was like / office manager / press, ad buying. We were figuring it out as we went along. And then, started signing bands that were probably a little bit more aligned with my personal taste eventually. And not that I didn't love the bands that we put out, but there was, like the things that I,
sure,
people I would play with, whatever.
Yeah, of course.
And that also is how, so one of those bands was the Donnas, and we ended up signing them, and, they were still, I think this is later, but not too much later, but they, were 17, just finishing high school when we started working on the record. And eventually, as they started to become more popular, and they were pretty unique, and it obviously connected to how I got started. There weren't that many all women rock bands, or even like partially women rock bands. And they were more commercially viable than many. So I ended up kind of focusing a lot of my work on them, and then eventually was managing them as in addition to them being on the label.
Okay. And
especially when we decided to sign to another label. So kind of like everybody was very professional. We've reached our capacity here. Let's explore other options.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I started managing them. So, but this is in the context that is really intense to reflect on is, the file sharing sort of happening simultaneously, the music sales economy kind of starting to decline and then fall off a cliff. But the bands were really good. So they really there were lots of great bands, and they wanted investment. And so that's when that sort of like, okay, let's keep this in print. Let's, sign this new band. Oh, they want a video, because, MTV would play a video once. So you're like, oh, they need a video for $2,500. And we weren't prepared for that, that sort of those changes. We had no experience with that. Right. And I mean, many companies didn't, but we weren't resourced with enough stability to weather that. And so that was, like certainly in my career over the last 30 plus years, I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit when Lookout wasn't successful and we had to shut down. That is definitely one of the things that, as painful as that remains, it's something I never, I always think about it as something you don't want to repeat. What can you do to avoid it? And, I do contemplate sometimes what are the things that might have been different if we didn't have the inventory management of physical records and records with potential, like Ted and like the Donnas, where you had to like oversupply and just couldn't. Right. It just didn't add up. You would have, every chain store needs 2 copies in distribution in the warehouse, right. Out on the floor. So you're stocking the warehouse in the event that someone wants to order a copy, and then they get returned, and you're penalized for them. It's just like the physical world was a terrible business, and we weren't savvy enough to understand how to reduce those risks. Right. So that was, painful on lots of levels, but.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think a lot of other small labels of the era can. I mean, my own experience, the advent of the iPod was really the death knell. That I've said it before. I think the Christmas of 2006 was the one where like every kid got an iPod.
Right.
And our when I say our, I mean GSL label. Our digital royalty reports, our sales reports between November and the following January you said you used the phrase "fall off a cliff." I mean, it couldn't be more apt. It just the sales just disappeared. The physical sales literally stopped, and then they within months there was this accumulating bottleneck of old merchandise coming back. CDs by the caseload. You can't recycle them. I'm sure you know.
It's just garbage. It's just garbage, and it's so painful because every single one is your art personally or your friends that in music you love, and it's like it's so. I mean, when I decided to do my small label, I was like, I'm going to do this so it's sustainable. If something happens, like then we'll be in a position to to grow it, but we're just going to keep it really small. And still I would like print 300 copies of something and I would have inventory. I'm just like, this business is just nuts. And the risks involved in developing bands and, sort of like getting started are just so immense that when I started, when I had the chance to go to Kickstarter and work there with a lot of bands who were just getting their start, one of my main sort of like propositions was working with A&R, working with labels to kind of like force the hard work on the bands so that they knew that if they were going to like spend 10 grand, they knew that the band had some work ethic. Mm-hmm. It was like a very kind of convoluted proposition, but I think I still kind of like, I can't let that one go all these years later because you still see, and now people are doing music in rooms like this mm-hmm. on their computers and, samplers and everything and putting them on SoundCloud, and sometimes they blow up. And sometimes they get signed from that one track that blows up, and they don't know what time of day it is. They don't know how anything works, right. And they're vulnerable. And there's like that kind of, thinking about all those bands that became major label indie bands in the 90s too, and a lot of hip hop as well. Like there's a vulnerability of like, oh, I'm going to be on the radio, I'm going to be on TV, I'm going to be on this playlist now. Mm-hmm. And then when the life cycle is so short, I mean, it's much shorter now. Like what's the plan? Right. So, that being in the space of helping people develop their creativity and, also when you and I were starting, publishing wasn't a thing that mattered to us at all, right? It was like, at all. Maybe you would join ASCAP or BMI, like because someone told you should, but like that wasn't really like money for us. Right. So it wasn't as important, but it is now, because of streaming and various royalties that are sort of like due via, law. Mm-hmm. And they have to be paid through certain channels, and they're really complicated to collect. That has been a sort of a weirdly empowering zone to be working in, and that's completely agnostic of taste. Like I actually don't have to listen to music, for better or worse. Like I like to listen to music, but like it doesn't matter what I think. The creativity for my job and what we do mm-hmm. is much more about accuracy of data. And, us all doing our jobs properly, because the system is inherently conflicted because it's mm-hmm. so chaotic mm-hmm. and anything you can do to reduce conflicts at any step is like, maybe you'll get your money. Mm-hmm. It's mm-hmm. effing crazy. But yeah, like I don't think there is a thread. I think about it, between the origin of, starting and, the politics of, women and girls and, diversity, if you will. That wasn't a term we really used, but of representation in music to what we're working on now. It's access and visibility and autonomy.
I mean, the landscape of music, of releasing music and distributing music and promoting artists being able to promote themselves and stuff has changed so drastically in the last 25 years. Does this, I mean, in a sense, as you said, the artists themselves are so much more empowered now. There's so many more tools at your disposal if you are creating music and
right.
Trying to distribute it yourself. Does all of this sort of spell the end ultimately of the independent label model?
I mean, I don't think it has to. I think there's still a great value in association and sort of like the validation that you get from a community of whether there's a sonic connection or physical, regional, and certainly there are people, it's just so corny, like with golden ears, maybe they hear, I don't know how much of that is relevant anymore, honestly. Like I have a harder time understanding how anyone is like listening to the most like genius new thing and discovering it in the same way. I think there's a little bit more of the like framework, which maybe sounds bad, but but I think that's a little bit more in common also with what our foundational communities were as well, because it wasn't like Lookout or even Discord and to a degree, maybe GSL and our other peer companies. It was like, this is where we were. These are our friends. We had maybe some access to some capital to kind of get some things made and sort of an efficiency funnel. I know it sounds terrible. This is like my life. This is my life. I'm sorry.
Great band name right there.
Oh God, I was just gonna come back to haunt me, but regularly this is fine with language for me to use. But now when I'm talking to you, I'm like, this is embarrassing.
I'm going to keep you real.
But I think that's true, and like if there is a way to to put things and maybe get some saving, so it's like you think about volume discounts and all of those sorts of things, that there's a lot of logic there. But also it's really hard to make yourself heard when you're just one person. And so, I hope that there are people who are in the same town going to shows and learning about bands that because their friends expose them to them and they're getting excited and everybody's anticipating. Like, I hope that still exists or will. I mean, who knows, right? What's going to happen?
Yeah. I'm sure somewhere in the world that's going on right now.
Right now.
Probably many somewheres, but maybe not.
I know. Well, all of the, who knows, like, you're hearing about all of the like COVID parties that were happening in Brooklyn. And so like, I've been locked in this apartment most of the last year. So I have no idea what the Brooklyn COVID party scene was like, but
there's some great bands coming out of Miami and all other places in the news constantly.
Right.
Before we get much further along, I just wanted to have a look at the comments that are coming in here.
Oh,
our friend Kevin Leon from Rapid City is along with us today.
Oh my goodness!
Speak of the devil. Felissa Womble has made some comments. Physical sales, crazy to think about this now. You can put your music on Bandcamp and USBs and release it and make more money and have friends who are handling it. Collaborating is key. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Felissa, for riding along with us today.
Bandcamp Friday tomorrow, right?
Oh, another one. Yeah, they're fairly routine right now. Oh, Chris Wilson.
They're every month. I haven't heard of them planning. I think whenever they announced that was going to continue, I haven't heard of an end date. So, that is something that I've certainly been inspired by how they have, sort of supported the, independent and mostly independent labels and artists over the last year.
Chris Wilson, our mutual friend, is here saying hi.
Oh my God. Well, Chris was in San Feliu. So
was he really?
Chris was there when we had our Lolo Lazaus summer. So
all right. I was thinking if there was a question I want to ask you, because I feel like you're the most qualified person I know personally to answer this, and I don't want to jeopardize. I don't want to put you in jeopardy in any way with your job about talking about any one company in particular. But there is let's just say, a very monolithic streaming company in effect nowadays that is a household name.
Yeah.
And they seem to get as much bad press as good. For as ubiquitous as they are, they seem to be universally despised by artists and record labels alike. And I wonder how.
Well, I would say for certainly a significant segment of independent artists, and I think for many record companies, as loved as they are loathed, right? Like there's just as depending on the way the wind's blowing.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be disingenuous of me to knock them and then say that I don't use them, because I do.
Right.
I DJ on a local radio station. It's so much easier to use their platform than any other. But having said that, how have we gotten to this situation where the world's most relied upon music provider, it can be argued, is essentially robbing the artists? Maybe robbing is the wrong word. And again, I'm not trying to frame this in a way to get you in any kind of.
No. I think I know that point of view, and how
have we gotten to this point, I guess, is my question. How has this happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think because it's arguable, and many do, that by the same token, that company and others like it have saved music.
Right.
And so you have this very challenging sort of coexistence around a large tech companies that are global and dynamic and have monetized, where there was only piracy historically, and have created some monetization versus zero or theft. So I think it's really tricky. And their product is generally people find it easy to use, and you have almost everything. And it's hard to argue. Like as a consumer, if you didn't know anything about the industry, you might say like, this is the best thing. And I can't keep up with how many hundreds of millions of customers they have. So but it's hundreds of millions of people that are paying or are able to monetize music in different ways. And so that cliff is now beyond where it dropped as a business. But who's getting the money? And that is I think the question that's driving a lot of this conversation, and at what rate, and is it in balance, is super complicated. And it is like a little bit of a topic that I don't have like an official position from my company or from myself, because I know that there are lots of nuances to it. I know when people, hear that kind of analysis, they're like, oh, that's so spineless. Like, come on. But I think it is very complicated. And, when you dig into it, a lot of the forces that kind of maintain that distribution of the revenue are not Spotify's fault.
Right.
I said their name. Right. They are, entities and organizations and systems and structures that, especially on the songwriter side, are over 100 years old, maintained by government in some cases, or other structures that have make them agreed upon. And there's lots of ways to argue that. Sure. Whether that's an equitable distribution. In the UK, that's a very active conversation. But I don't expect that and I do want to participate in that, because I do think that there is, if you look at the pie of money earning around music now, between songwriters or producers and all of the different participants in the creation of the recordings and the access to the recordings, there might be a different way to look at it. And I think that some of the companies like Deezer and SoundCloud are exploring new models of remuneration that to test them out and see, like, how does it all play out. But so I support that kind of exploration. And I think it's good when the major companies are willing to participate in a test even, sure. To sort of see, like, what are the facts? Because a lot of the economic theory that I think you apply to what is fair and what is just, we don't have all the evidence of what it would actually like net out to. So as a individual songwriter, or if I was a recording artist, if I would make more if I was independent versus major. So right. I don't know. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Absolutely, it does. And I suppose now is as good a time as any. If you don't mind, would you mind kind of just explaining what Songtrust is, sure, and what it does? You were hired there a couple of years ago, and then last year you were promoted to president of the company. Congratulations.
Correct. Yeah. So I joined in the end of 2017, and it's our 10th year of business. We've been sort of music publishing, as we've been talking about, is pretty narrow in the access that it's offered. Over the years, it's been very much like traditional major publishing companies and lots of independent publishing companies too. But because of the way that they operated and the way that the revenues are collected and distributed, it's like there's a long gap. Someone said today, one of my colleagues is like, and we say it, I think we must say it once a month, like, there's no such thing as like a crisis in music publishing generally, because it just takes a long time to register, collect, make sure things are conflicts are resolved, and then pay the rightful rights holders. And then there's all like that sort of conflict zone. It's really not because anyone is, I think generally it's not because anyone's intentionally trying to withhold money from anyone. It's because there are many places in this somewhat archaic, now massively voluminous part of the industry that there are many places where the shit can go wrong. Mm-hmm. So, I always say, like, part of the hard work that has to start is when you are writing a song and you decide, if you and I are collaborating, that we are sharing it 50-50, and we agree that everything we do from here on, we're going to say Sunny K, Molly Neuman, 50-50, and nobody's ever going to challenge it. Right. But you may well sell your 50% to someone many times, like or 5% of it. I mean, that's like the fractions upon fractions upon fractions in all of these different micro lines of revenue. So whether it's, less so broadcast radio, more so global streaming, and there are various details to like how those rights are calculated for the songwriter, for the publishing company, how they're attributed and collected, whether you are from, like, for example, in a country that has a certain, if it's non-English speaking country, they have other kinds of rules and classifications. It's wild, man. It is the most wild segment of the industry. And what we do at Songtrust is make it available to pretty much anyone. So you can become a client, a customer. Our offer is $100, and then we retain 15% of what we collect on your behalf.
You pay $100 fee to get set up.
To just set up your account, and and so for us to kind of make sure that you're invested a little bit, because there's work to do. Right. It's like doing your taxes. It's not the most fun thing that you're going to do. You might want to play with your sampler, your keyboard, your drums, your vocals. Like, that's more fun this is less fun, but it's pretty important. And so in order for us to sort of like incentivize you to do those, steps and take the proper actions, there's a bit of a sort of a upfront fee. And so that is, and then once you become a client, you enter your works, you enter your splits, hopefully they're correct. If you have recordings associated with them, we want to have the ISRCs, so the recording codes, so that when we register them with the societies, whether it's an ASCAP BMI or here in the US, there's an organization called the Mechanical Licensing Collective. Globally, there's like pretty much that equivalent times who knows. Brazil has 5 versions of ASCAP BMI. Wow. And there's just a lot of different complexities. Then we start to register. And then when your works are matched with that entity's activity, the royalties will be associated, and we'll get paid, and then we'll pay you. So it's not simple, but what we're trying to offer is a global network in one place. And so the main distinction about how we do that is we become members of these societies we're direct members, versus wherever possible. And there are certainly some cases where we collect through some reciprocal deals. If it's a small society, they don't want to be us to be a direct member. But we try to avoid that wherever we can and have as much efficiency. And then using some, whether it's technology or different kinds of systems that we can match the work to our clients and find out, what's missing here. And doing that at the scale that we operate. That's not an elevator pitch, but that's what we do.
Melissa is asking, is that $100 an annual fee, or is that a one-time fee?
No, it's a one-time fee.
Okay.
It's basically a setup, to sort of, and again, to ensure that there's, some personal investment. We also work with lots of, sort of discounts, and, usually if you join one of our webinars, there's a code.
Is there any, so are you, am I right in understanding you sort of like are, in essence, are going around the globe, basically striking deals in each territory to retrieve, to collect things like radio play and all this kind of stuff. And so you literally have to go country by country and create a relationship with the organizations there and that kind of thing. Is there anywhere that's resistant to this? Is there anywhere that's real shady?
No, I don't think so. I think what the resistance is because of our volume, and we do represent, while what the company represents the works of, we have clients that represent John Lennon works, and lots of Miles Davis and other, massively important historic songbooks. But a lot of our business is also, independent creators that have grown, that is a whole segment of the music economy that has grown so much, especially in the last few years, because access to the tools to make music, access to being able to distribute them on all of the platforms around the world. Since that has opened up, there's just that much more volume, and there's a lot of activity. So that's a big part of our client base. It's tricky because that, like I said, these organizations are in many cases, over 100 years old. Their systems are modernizing. It's not that they're not doing the work, but it's a challenging proposition. So we try to work with them as partners. We know that a lot of the work that we represent might not have activity in their market. So if we can, what we were trying to make sure is that if we do have activity in that market, that we're going to, do our best to make sure that it's registered properly and attributed properly, and that we're, in a position to sort of expand on that as, like say you had a song that took off, make sure that that one is registered properly every single place, including Poland, Estonia, etc. But, maybe those societies, if no one's really listening to your work there, maybe they don't, that we shouldn't try to shove that through their pipes, if you will.
Without belaboring this point forever, one thing that always seemed so sort of mysterious to me as a person receiving these increasingly report stacks of ISRCs and 100-page printout of all these downloads from around the world, it seems as though it's, if people can rely on someone like you who's trustworthy and you're running a trustworthy company and it sort of, it allows for a sense of security in this whole thing. I could never stop. I could never wriggle out from the feeling of this thing just being this big sort of invisible maze of stuff. And, it seems like the likelihood of things going below the radar on a planet as big as ours seems just like a given. And so I think the fact that you are one of the people making inroads to control that or remove the mystery,
improve it,
it provides me with, I feel like it's reducing my anxiety of just thinking about all that stuff, and
well, I will take that. I appreciate that very much. It's, I've had to learn this part of the business over the last 3.5 years. Like, this wasn't my zone of expertise by any means. I had been working at Kickstarter. Our CEO at Downtown, Justin Kalifowitz, and I were friends. And, when they were deciding that Songtrust had, there was a big opportunity that we hadn't really yet expanded on. It was kind of like I think, what do you call it? Like a side project. He was like, there is money to collect if we register these works. But no publishing company, because publishing companies are like very much based on the advance. Because of that long lag time, you're like, okay, I'm going to pay you $50,000. Hopefully we'll collect within the 3 years. When it's time for renewal, we'll either renew or you'll be set free. And since we changed the $50,000 advance or $100,000 advance to here's a $100 setup fee in the other direction, but you keep 85% versus 50-50 or whatever it was, that was working, but they hadn't marketed it yet. So my first role was, to help put together a team to do sales and marketing. And then that first year I was, on a plane, shocking to consider in the same way now, but like on a plane for, 2-3 weeks every month, every other month. So I did go to Estonia. I went to Australia and Singapore and, like Amsterdam. Like, I went everywhere I could to talk about it while we were building the team. And and we were doing also pretty normal, like digital marketing, paid ads that you see, and that was starting to connect. And so I have put a lot of myself and my personal belief into what we're doing. And what I appreciate the most about how we can do this now is that now that our company is a little bit bigger and we're investing more in the, systems and the scale, is that, we can work with, like, one of our business development representatives is based in Amsterdam, and she's been working mostly on, not mostly, but like with a great deal of focus on African writers. And she has been able to work with, some companies there that have a sort of, kind of like we were talking about, like a hub of writers who trust their local lawyer who's done a deal with us. And now they're starting to see, real revenues based on a lot of what's happening in the US, but they just never had that access to those revenues previously, those royalties. And so that is very empowering. That is very, for me, energizing about what we can do and it's not like it's literally not easy at all. It's literally like I've probably never worked harder in my life, and with a lot of resources, but not infinite. And there's the problems to solve are like big data and, a lot of things that are, I'm learning something new almost every day about how to solve these problems. But it's pretty rewarding.
I bet it is. Yeah, I bet it. And I'm not surprised to hear that you're busier than you've ever been, because it seems, I can't even imagine.
It's so messed up, man. Like, I realized like, oh crap, it's 6:22. I've got to get dinner for my kid.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to you for being able to spend as much time.
No, it's great. I look forward to it. And, I was looking forward to seeing you, and, it's,
likewise.
It's true. Like, a lot of us who started in the DIY kind of world, which is now kind of has a different association. But I think it's pretty incredible to see. I mean, Justin's writing books. He's doing all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, I think his book is hilarious and sometimes shocking. And, there's,
more incriminating.
I'm really proud of the fact that a lot of us have evolved into interesting and sustainable, work. And that, I'll be 50 soon, but there's still work to do. So that's good news.
Great attitude to have. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I feel exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to keep you, because I know you have been up for a long time today. You were up commenting before I was even awake this morning, I saw online, and I feel like I need to get you off the hook. Let's check in a year, see how we're doing, or
I would love that. Yeah, whatever works for you.
There's so much to talk. There's so much more that I actually wanted to talk to you about.
You should get Allison on here, because she has her whole other. Yes. Or we could get the three of us. That's a scene.
Would be awesome. Let's do that.
When we start talking, I mean, it's a little. I talk like this a lot for my job, and they don't. So but we revert into these other kind of like, patterns of it's fun. So yeah, I would do that. I have a hard time. Like, we played a show, a Bratmobile, last summer.
You did?
When Toby, the 2019. Toby had a big birthday, and she invited us to play, and we played in Olympia. And there's some like videos on Instagram of it, and it was really fun. And immediately, our friends were like, "Oh, do you want to come here or there?" And at first, I contemplated it, and then I knew that my job was going to change shortly after that, and I was like, and then the pandemic happened. So I'm glad that we didn't wind ourselves up too much. But I never say never. It's just it's not the right time for us to play. But we are still very close. We text a lot. We talk about things a lot, and so if a few things need to line up before I'm probably have the space to work on that, but I'm sure we will do it again.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear that. And as far as what you mentioned, I would be thrilled to have all three of you on.
Okay. And, I'm sure we can get that done.
Yeah. I would love just a chance to catch up with the other two ladies would be wonderful. Yeah. And to pick your collective brain together would be great.
Awesome.
Molly, I can't thank you enough for.
Well, thank you, Sunny. It's great to see you. And thanks to everybody who was tuned in, all of our friends.
Thank you so much also to Mark Lewis for riding along and commenting, Bobby Missile, and others. Thanks everyone so much.
Awesome.
Molly, congratulations on all of your successes. And
thank you. Likewise.
Well, thank you. I look forward to seeing what the future holds for you and talking to you and the rest of Bratmobile very soon.
Awesome. Okay, we'll do it.
Thanks so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye, Molly.
Bye.